Welcome to the third generation version of Fiat's Panda 4x4, the people's off-roader. It's a car that can shrug off the worst of British weather while still looking good in any social setting. There's not much to touch this little Italian contender. Affordable, fun to drive, eco-friendly and remarkably capable. It's an almost unique proposition if you need something very small that's also very capable. Weight isn't only the enemy of efficiency and performance, it's also the enemy of four-wheel drive capability. Ironic, isn't it, that the more money and technology that's poured into large and apparently capable off-roaders, the less use they often are when conditions are soft and slushy. Those living in some of Europe's toughest mountain regions know this all too well, which is why their day-to-day transport needs are so often covered not by huge Land Rovers or Land Cruisers, but by this car, the Panda 4x4. But of course, much as we might like to, most of us don't live in Alpine Italy or France. So just how much of a market can Fiat expect this car to have here, in this, its third generation guise? A bigger one is the short answer. Though a tiny but loyal band of rural midwives and vets swear by this all-road Panda, it has sold here in vanishingly small numbers since its original launch way back in 1983. Mainly, it must be said, because previous versions were pretty crude. Buyers didn't care that this was one of the cheapest ways into four-wheel drive motoring you could get if the end result was thirsty, noisy and about as comfortable as a woodcutter's cart. Such are the challenges facing this Mark III model, alongside the fact that Dacia's Duster has usurped it as Britain's least expensive 4x4. In response, Fiat has brought us a car that, while still smaller, lighter and nippier than any other vehicle fit for muddy duty, is now better equipped, smarter, safer and much cheaper to run. And yes, still cute. Let's try it. So, is this a proper four-wheel drive vehicle that just happens to be shaped like a city car? Or a city car that just happens to have four-wheel drive? If, like me, you guessed at the second option before your test drive, well, you'd be right. For a start, there's potentially as little as 150 millimetres of ground clearance, so attempting the Rubicon Trail in one of these would be something of a non-starter. But of course, though Fiat talks about trips to Lapland, a Paris-Dakar rally entry and daring drives to the Mount Everest base camp, that's not really what this car is all about. Let's be real here, it's actually a second family vehicle that'll get you just about anywhere you reasonably want to go in a snowy snap. Well, it will in 4x4 form. There's also an identical looking and slightly cheaper front-wheel driven trekking version for those who need to talk the talk without necessarily having to walk the walk. Though to be fair, even this Panda variant will be pretty capable in the slush thanks to Traction Plus, a system that uses ESP stability control electronics to transfer power to whichever of the front wheels has the most grip. This, allied to a set of winter tyres, will probably be quite good enough for those who simply want a bit of extra on tarmac winter peace of mind. To me, though, it seems a pity not to shake the piggy bank a little further and enjoy the full fat Panda 4x4 experience, especially as it's so potentially surprising if you're brave enough to venture off the highway and put it to the test. It's one of those talk-on-demand setups, which essentially means that the car will always be front-driven unless slippery conditions require that drive to the rear wheels be also brought into play, which then happens automatically without the need for any driver input. Now, at this point, two differentials and an electronically controlled coupling take over, gradually increasing the amount of power that's sent to the rear wheels as conditions demand. Now, that would have been the extent of the off-road mechanicals of an early Panda 4x4 model, but this one goes a bit further. The Italian engineers reasoned that since this Mark III version had sophisticated ASR traction control and ESC stability control fitted, the electronics involved might as well join the party. hence the ELD, or electronic locking differential feature, that you can select in really bad conditions at speeds of under 31 miles an hour by pressing this button just behind the gear lever. Now, with ELD in place, wheels with poor grip are automatically braked, while power is then simultaneously transferred to those with greater purchase. The electronics also cut in to create an anti-skid system when you're negotiating steep descents. So in other words, aided by its bespoke all-season M+S tyres, this little thing will go much further than you might expect from something with a ride height raised by just 47mm over its standard city car stablemate. True, it won't match a really proper SUV when the going gets especially gnarly, but off the beaten track, it'll certainly embarrass a lot of compact 4x4s you'd expect to cope far better. After all, the maximum angle of gradient that a Panda 4x4 can approach without any part of its bodywork touching the ground is 20 degrees. The maximum departure angle, or angle of gradient from which it can drive away without touching the ground, is 36 degrees. And its breakover angle at the top of a hill is 20 degrees. All of these figures vary slightly depending on your choice of engine. There are two: an 85 brake horsepower TwinAir 0.9 litre two-cylinder petrol unit, and the 75 brake horsepower 1.3 litre multijet diesel that I'm using here. Opinions differ slightly as to which of the two units is better for off-road work. Because the petrol model has 6 rather than 5 speeds in its rather awkwardly notchy manual gearbox, its first ratio can be a very low crawler gear, which is great for inching down steep descents. On the minus side, though, the installation of the petrol TwinAir engine is such that it gives you 10mm less ground clearance than the diesel can offer. And inevitably, pulling power is quite a bit less than you get with the diesel. 145 newton meters as opposed to 190 newton meters of torque, which drops the towing limit, it's 900 kilograms in the diesel version, by 100 kilograms. In fact, the TwinAir driver who doesn't deactivate the engine's rather annoying eco setting gets just 100 newton meters of torque, and that really will inhibit you off-road. Overall then, I think the diesel has the edge if you'll be venturing off the paved road with any frequency. But if you won't be, the TwinAir petrol engine may just win you over with its eager feel and slightly better performance. Though both models top out at around 100 miles an hour, the TwinAir's 0 to 62 mile an hour time of 12.1 seconds is nearly 2.5 seconds quicker than that of the diesel. Best to try before you buy. Whichever version you end up choosing, a little surprisingly, you'll find the ride quality from the beefed up suspension to be quite a bit better than it is in a standard conventional Panda. Cruising over pock-marked urban tarmac, the ordinary car would crash through. Cityscape, you'll navigate through more easily thanks to dual drive power steering that you can instantly lighten by pressing this city button on the dash. Out of town, you'll find a bit more body roll through tight corners thanks to the extra ride height, but nothing that you couldn't live with day to day. So it's still endearing to drive as well as to look at. Thank goodness for that. So it's a Panda, but perhaps not quite as you know it. There are skid plates, a raised ride height, roof rails, and a general feeling of purpose that all fit in with this car's wider off-roading remit, without making it feel as ridiculous as some SUVs often seem when your journey takes you through the urban jungle. As well as revised bumpers, there are bespoke door handles and mirror fairings, as well as protective side strips, black side skirts, and wheel arch mouldings to better show off the burnished 15-inch alloys. Look a little more closely and you start to pick up this car's infamous squircle design theme, with rounded rectangles in vogue everywhere, from the headlamps to the front air intake, from the wheel arches to that trademark extra third rearward side window. There's more of this inside too, with squircle shapes to be found on the instrument binnacle, the steering wheel boss and the ventilation controls on the centre console. It's a cabin that, to be honest, wasn't really designed to sell at the kind of price tag this Panda 4x4 must carry. So there are no soft touch plastics or soothing chrome highlights. Still, you can improve things by specifying eco-leather detailing on the seats and door panels and making a careful bespoke choice of dashboard frame colour. This green finish really suits this variant's Greenwellian Barber 4x4 feel. And there's certainly lots of clever design. The lovely mouse-shaped handbrake lever, the optional front passenger seat that can be folded down into a picnic table, and the fact that if you search hard enough, you'll find no fewer than 15 different storage spaces. One of them is the roomy pocket you get on the dash ahead of the front passenger, something supposed to evoke a nod towards original 80s Panda motoring. That really was basic, even for its time, though the Mark I model was undeniably clever, with seats that could be removed completely and washed, or kept in and turned into a double bed. Now, I can't imagine anyone in a position to afford a modern Panda needing overnight accommodation in it, but comfort will be a priority once seated at the wheel, where you perch high up in the kind of position you'd expect a miniature people carrier to provide, complete with brilliant all-round visibility that makes even this slightly larger Mark III model easy to place in the tightest city streets. It's true that there are a few issues. I could do without a set of headrests finished in hard, unyielding plastic, and as with many city cars, the steering adjusts only for height and not for reach. A particular issue if you don't specify the extra cost height adjustable driver's seat that I've got here. But on the plus side, the switchgear and the stalk controls function with a quality click, and the high mounted gear lever is nicely positioned, just where you'd want it. And in the back, where there are lovely optional touches like this seat back multifaceted storage pouch, well, I can't offhand think of many other city car sized hatchbacks that even attempt to carry 5 people in the way that this Panda does. Can it manage exactly that? Well, if the journey's not too long, the people aren't too portly, and you paid extra for the sliding rear bench that maximises legroom at the expense of rear luggage space, then I'd say just about yes, which is no small accomplishment in a car this tiny. Out back, the 225-litre boot isn't badly sized for a car of this class, and if you've specified the optional sliding rear bench and push it forward, you can free up as much as 260 litres. Now, there's an optional cargo box you can slot in and out, which makes gathering together all your belongings and taking them in and out of the house just that little bit easier. And if you're not using the rear bench, you can push it forward. There's this optional extra cost split folding arrangement and free up as much as 870 litres. That's 36 litres more than the previous generation version of this car could offer. If that still isn't enough, you've got the further option of a fold flat front passenger seat, which can accommodate items of up to 2 metres in length. Given that prices of the standard 2-wheel drive Panda model start in the region of about £9,000, you might be expecting this 4x4 version to be a little cheaper than it is. But that would be to ignore that the car comes only in one highly spec'd trim level and fitted with the 2 most desirable engines in the Panda range. The 2-cylinder 85 brake horsepower 0.9 litre petrol TwinAir unit, costing from around £14,000, and this 4-cylinder 75 brake horsepower 1.3 litre multijet diesel that's available for a premium of around £1,000 more. To put that into perspective, you're looking at paying around £2,700 more for this car than you would for a normal 2-wheel drive Panda with the same engine and a similar trim level. You can cut that premium to around £1,200 if you opt to do without 4-wheel drive and go for the visually similar trekking version. Priced from under £13,000, this uses a clever Traction Plus system to make the most of the grip that it has. As for rivals to the fully fledged Panda 4x4 we're focusing on here, well, this Fiat has long had the all-wheel drive city car segment to itself. Though if you're prepared to accept something very slightly bigger, Dacia's Duster and Suzuki's SX4 both offer alternative routes into the very cheapest end of the four-wheel drive market. Duster 4x4 pricing actually starts at around £11,000, but for that the specification's nothing like as good. Go for a decently equipped, air-conditioned 4x4 diesel version and you'll find yourself spending exactly the same kind of money as you would on an equivalent Panda. And a comparable Suzuki SX4 would be significantly pricier. If, having considered all of this, you conclude that it is this Fiat that you really want, then you'll want to know what comes as part of the deal. Quite a lot, actually. I was surprised to find it necessary to pay extra for things like a split-folding rear seat, a space-saving rear wheel instead of just a tyre puncture repair kit, and a height-adjustable driver's seat. But you do get 15-inch alloy wheels, roof rails, daytime running lights, front fog lights, power front windows, air conditioning, a 6-speaker CD stereo, Bluetooth phone compatibility, and a hill holder clutch to stop you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions. The Panda has been engineered to accept Blue & Me TomTom Live, an integrated sat-nav information, hands-free and entertainment system with wheel-mounted controls. Other options I'd want to consider, apart from the extra cost items mentioned earlier, include the sliding rear bench, the fold-flat front passenger seat, a heated windscreen, and the Tuscany green metallic paint I've got here that really suits the car, especially when matched to the olive green dashboard. This particular model also has the city brake control system, which constantly scans the road ahead for collision hazards. If one is detected, the system will warn you. If you don't respond or aren't able to, city brake control can apply the anchors automatically to decrease the severity of any accident and hopefully enable you to avoid it altogether. On the subject of safety, it's a pity you have to pay extra for side airbags, but twin front and curtain bags are standard, as are all the usual electronic assistance features for braking, traction and stability control. Now, there aren't too many cars I can think of where the published fuel figures for the petrol version are directly comparable to those of the diesel alternative, but that's the case here. When mated to a Panda 4x4, the 0.9 litre two-cylinder TwinAir petrol unit is supposed to deliver 57.6 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 114 grams per kilometre of CO2. That may be about 10% worse than the two-wheel drive Panda Trekking TwinAir model and about 15% worse than an ordinary Panda with this engine. But it's still a pretty impressive return in comparison to the appalling figures of something like a rival Dacia Duster Petrol 1.6, which manages 35.3 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 185 grams per kilometre of CO2. But what the figures don't tell you is that such returns are only possible if you engage the TwinAir Panda's sprint-sapping eco mode, which cuts your pulling power by nearly 50% and can rapidly become, well, a bit annoying. Hence my personal preference for the 1.3 litre multi-jet diesel engine that I'm trying here. Though its 125 grams per kilometre of CO2 return is slightly down on that of the TwinAir, the combined cycle 60.1 miles to the gallon fuel figure is a little better and would, I'd suggest, be a lot easier to achieve in ordinary day-to-day motoring. It's certainly a big improvement on what you'd get in a comparable diesel Dacia Duster, helping owners to get somewhere close to these kinds of figures on an ordinary day-to-day basis is a gear shift indicator and a start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. There's also an eco drive system that links into the Blue & Me infotainment setup. To use it, you download the bespoke phone app, then pair the phone to the car and connect to the USB port so that acceleration, deceleration, gear shift and speed data can be recorded. Your driving skills will then be rated and tips given on how to make them more efficient. What else? Residual values will be slightly better than those of a standard Panda thanks to this model's relative rarity, and insurance groupings range between Group 6 and 7 for the Panda Trekking and are fixed at Group 7 for this 4x4 model. Fiat's Panda 4x4 is one of the most enduring cars I can think of. After all, even after one of these flunks its final MOT test, it'll still be good value to somebody. And if you look in barns and farm buildings, the length and breadth of the country, you'll often find these little workhorses stored away before being pressed into use as field cars, or as runabouts that rural teens can learn to drive in, bouncing along rutted tracks and handbraking in muddy paddocks. Of course, these Fiats once emerged from a dealership polished and new, with a proud owner who wanted a chic and capable small car. That hasn't changed a bit, and this third generation Panda 4x4 adheres to the same formula that's been good since 1983. Of course, it's a far slicker operator than the original, but believe me, you'll be glad of that if you have to live with the thing. Nostalgia isn't what it was. Overall, this model's appealing mix of city car and SUV remains as unique as it always was. This, a small runabout with added capability, rather than a properly serious off-roader distilled into tiny form. Understand that, and there isn't much not to like. Most brands would have created a car like this with more style than substance, but Fiat hasn't, which is, I think, why the Panda 4x4 has such an enduring appeal, and why so many more 2 or 3 car British families really ought to be looking at one.